Hi, welcome to Road of Trials. Maybe that seems like a silly name, but I promise there's a good reason for it. So, what we're going to be doing here is one of those hip, new, critically focused Let's Plays, this one for good old Dark Souls. I'm going to be performing a reading of this game, drawing a meaning from it, and inspecting how the game creates that meaning. This isn't one of those lore things the game is known for. I think those are a lot of fun as a kind of fan work, and I will be drawing from some of the game's narrative context, which is less immediately obvious. But I'm more interested in what themes and ideas I can draw out of the game as a whole. You know, literary analysis, semiotics, game design, that kind of thing. What I'm hoping is that if you already like Dark Souls, maybe I can show you a new way of looking at some aspects of it. And if you don't like it, or if you just don't know it, maybe I can show you some of what makes this game so interesting to me. But first things first, we've got to create a character, our hero, yeah? You see where I'm going yet? Strangely enough, it was this character creation screen that initially sold me on this game when I was feeling skeptical that a spiritual successor to Demon Souls could live up to how much I enjoyed that one. I thought the setting of demons was very strong and was kind of bummed that this game was set in a different place. But then I heard this rather striking music and saw how this game right off the bat starts making all these interesting choices. Like, these preset faces are all unexpectedly bound to particular nationalities, with these tiny little bits of background information which hardly feel impartial. Like, a story guy gets to be handsome, but scholarly looks invite insult. And we can choose a gift. Some of them have unique functions or can make early bosses super easy, but others are mysterious or even explicitly useless. Not that anyone believed them on that. Anyway, you always take the master key. Plus, if you look over here, there's a joke that characters with big heads could be very intellectual. Obviously, that's us. So this screen helps establish a tone of mystery and starts to set up the game's opaque style of storytelling, but it does it in a way which I found really beguiling. The screen has a peculiar mood, strange and confusing, but funny. So when I first saw it, I closed whatever stream I was watching and knew I had to get this game. So, have you guys ever heard of the hero with 1,000 faces? What I really want to talk about here is that with a lack of specific narrative context, without any clue what our character is actually going to be getting up to, or what their place is in the world, we're forced to just build them around whatever fantasy hero archetype we find the most immediately appealing. And to do this, we have to reach inside of ourselves. To quote Joseph Campbell for the first time in this series, in the absence of an effective general mythology, each of us has his private, unrecognized, rudimentary, yet secretly potent pantheon of dream. As I'm sure many of you know, The Hero with 1,000 Faces is a super influential book by Joseph Campbell, who's going to be one of our big subjects in this series. Recently I wrote a little post about how Bloodborne can be read as a critique of Lovecraft, and one of the main things I want to do here is provide a similar reading of Dark Souls as a critique of Campbell. So I'm just going to introduce Campbell while I try to sculpt this doofus's face until I start to recognize the paladin who lurks deep inside my subconscious. And this is not going to be easy because this character creation thing is not very good. So, Campbell was something of a philosopher or a theorist. Wikipedia pegs him as a mythologist. I peg him as a dork, born tragically before the invention of Dungeons and Dragons. He subscribed to Carl Jung's idea of a collective unconscious, an inherited part of the human psyche, which exists in addition to Freud's conscious and unconscious minds, perhaps the firmament from which those structures grow. Jung said that the collective unconscious is identical in all individuals. Now, this idea may have laid the groundwork for psychologists to observe things like language acquisition, object permanence, pattern recognition, essentially the parameters of an animal brain's capabilities, and the structure by which a mind operates. For Jung, though, and for Campbell, it had more to do with what he called archetypes, a kind of taxonomy of images and characters recurrent in the human brain across all cultures. What Jung essentially did was listen to his patient's dreams like a classic example of an old-time quacky shrink, and go looking for examples of similar images in old myths, and then take that as evidence of a primordial human narrative. For instance, there's an old Aboriginal coming-of-age ritual where the boys are circumcised by an invocation of the Great Father Snake. So when one of Jung's patients, just on the cusp of letting go of certain hang-ups, which sure lick of an edible complex, dreams about a snake biting him on the dick, eureka! The collective unconscious is proved. So Campbell was fascinated by how this, the astounding psychological breakthrough of his time, could be further applied to mythology, his great love. After all, there's something that drives just about every human culture toward myth-making, and that something could only be the collective unconscious. He began to see myth as a kind of collective dream. And don't forget, he was a Jungian, so dreams are pretty important too. Essentially, he found mythology to be the collective unconscious's point of origin, and therefore the nexus of all psychic activity. As Campbell puts it, that characteristic efficacy to touch and inspire deep creative centers dwells in the smallest nursery fairy tale, as the flavor of the ocean is contained in a droplet, or the whole mystery of life within the egg of a flea. For the symbols of mythology are not manufactured. They cannot be ordered, invented, or permanently suppressed. They are spontaneous productions of the psyche, and each bears within it, undamaged, the germ power of its source. Unlike a majority of philosophers, Campbell was a very pretty writer, which helped him demonstrate that his big idea was also very pretty. And doesn't something about it kinda seem to ring true? Don't you kinda have some symbolic associations you can't really account for? Don't you at least sometimes kinda yearn for a spiritual connection to some old tales? I do, at least. When I read Campbell, I see so much bullshit magical thinking built on faulty old ideas implicated in no small amount of straight-up primitivist racism and Freudian sexism, but I also find a lot that really resonates with me in a way I don't entirely like. With a lot of these old thinkers, there's a ton of crap you have to sift through. But in the center of it all, maybe you'll find a key idea which is so undeniable, or at least so appealing, that the entire culture has internalized it. Freud was a dingus who projected all his creepy hang-ups onto his entire practice, but he still gave us the idea that there's a part of our minds, besides our conscious mind, which sometimes influences us in ways we'd rather it wouldn't. Jung helped us deal with the fact that we have to contend with yet another instinct-driven part of our psyche. And Campbell, well, I think he gets to the heart of why I want to be a paladin, and why I need to get his chin to look right. I can only really guess why the paladin is one of the classes I gravitate towards. That's just the thing. He's an archetype. It's my unconscious that's drawn towards him. Maybe I envy the paladin his singularity of purpose and the steadfastness with which he pursues it. In this game, he begins as a cleric on a pilgrimage. He seeks a closeness to the grander order of his world, but without the amorality or the detachment of a sorcerer. The paladin believes on faith that there's a righteous force guiding his actions, and he can perform miracles whose efficacy reinforces his faith. He exercises his own righteousness through brawn and decisive action. He never shies from a fight. I want him to succeed. I want him to find the benevolent higher power he's looking for, because I want that benevolence to feel present in my universe. So what I'm doing here, what I'm really doing, is defining my image of a hero, with an eye towards what specific crises of conscience I hope to address by going along with him on his journey. The journey is what the game will provide. It's a construction. It's all been laid out for me. And the fantasy theme, along with the expectation of hardships to overcome and a strange world to traverse prime me to expect that this journey will resonate with Campbell's monomyth. This stuff already looks mythical. Campbell, of course, would argue that all myths, in fact, all human adventures, will resonate with what he called his archetypal hero's journey. That was the main goal of his book, to lay out a framework that exposes the path all heroes in all myths follow. And because those myths are so central to all human consciousness, he believed that this was essentially the path that gives life meaning. All of us, he believed, were looking for a way into our very own monomythic journey. So this here paladin is a vehicle I'm going to use to do just that. His concerns reflect what I'm doing myself right now. I want to become closer to the world this game represents. I want to know and understand its canon, not for the sake of simply having all the facts, but so that I might use that canon the way a holy man can recite a miraculous incantation. I want to weaponize that knowledge, promote what's right, and defeat what's wrong. I want to advance my understanding of that which is good. And this beard is not good. Why is his face blue? But a paladin's tragic weakness is that he's easily misled, right? He'll make himself a weapon for whoever convincingly enough seems to be divine. And while Joseph Campbell is certainly pretty faulty even at first glance, I can kind of relate to my poor gullible paladin. I can't quite shake my feeling that Campbell, once you get past the Eurocentric crap about red-eyed witch doctors reciting mumbo-jumbo, has his finger on something valuable, something true. Not the hippy-dippy crap about the spiritual yearning for a heroic journey, which every human shares, of course. I'll probably spend a lot of time in this series being really angry about that idea, but something simpler, a little harder to describe, something about the utility of stories, at least within a certain cultural framework that I share with him. So, you've probably picked up by now that I'm being a little disingenuous when I talk about my building this hero in a vacuum, with no idea as to what will be the particulars of the adventure. I do think this screen does that to new players, but I've played Dark Souls a bunch of times, and I totally have an idea about what particular dramatic irony I'm setting Hamlet the Paladin up for. But I am being honest when I say that I don't have all the answers. I really do want to use this series to figure all this stuff out about myself and about Campbell and about Dark Souls by seeing what happens when I put those three things into a clear, recorded dialogue with one another, and maybe with you. But I want to be clear on something here. As this goes on, I'm going to be saying stuff that could make it sound like I'm convinced that Dark Souls is an intentional comment on Joseph Campbell. I'm not convinced about that at all. There are times I kind of believe it, but that really makes no difference to what I'm doing here. I'm reading this game. I'm having a conversation with it. I'm bringing things to it with the intention of seeing what it gives back to me in return. This is how art works. I've had a lot of good conversations with Dark Souls over the years. As a paladin, as a sorcerer, as a hunter, as a thief. While I tackle this thing about Campbell, I'm totally going to go over some of the thoughts I had during those runs as well. This isn't all going to be about Campbell. This is pretty much my favorite video game. It's a lot of people's favorite video game, but no one loves any game or any piece of culture quite the same way as anybody else. So I feel like I have a lot to share here. Just ask my friend Isaac, who has listened to me talk about Dark Souls more than any one person should have to bear. I usually choose to play as a female character when the option's available, by the way, just putting that out there. It was especially tempting this time because of how great it would be to stick it to Campbell's dead Freudian face by upsetting his shitty normative gender roles, but I didn't want to risk making her a Jocasta figure now, did I? That could be fraught. So, burly muscle guy it is. I'm sure we'll find an excuse later on to visit with the nimble and cunning huntress, who's no less significant to me than this paladin, who will be done as soon as I finish flicking his nostrils into place. A couple of shout-outs before we really get started here. If I hadn't seen Heather Alexandra's super smart Let's Play of Shadow of the Colossus, I'd have never had the idea to do this. And the same goes for James Howell's just superlative run of Metal Gear Solid 2. I don't know who did the first critical Let's Play, but it's a form I'm excited about, and it was these two who happened to introduce me to it. So, if you've never come across those before, click the annotations. I definitely remembered to put on your screen to check those out. So the first thing shown in the game is this fog that shrouds the primordial, unformed world. This could be read as a reference to the colorless fog from Demon's Souls, a malevolence that was spreading across and erasing the world of that game. I'm not suggesting that I believe there's a secret metaphysical plot thread linking these two fictional universes, but this is the first of many such callbacks. I'll go into these callbacks more in a future episode, but for now it's interesting to note this as resembling the process of myths being adapted and altered over time, the way Ares became Mars, for instance. So now we see unfolding the events which formed the world. If we weren't already in a mythological frame of mind, we definitely are now. It's a vague little cosmogony, but not without a strong central symbol. Without fire, everything would be flat and still. There would be no difference between life or death or light and dark. Fire, then, is the mana that allows the cosmos, as we understand it, to exist. There seems to be a causal relationship in this world between fire and the existence of souls. Souls are essentially this game's life force and locus of agency, not unlike how we understand them, but crucially, there are bigger and smaller souls, more powerful and less powerful. Also, souls can be transferred from being to being, either willingly or through force. The game now introduces the entities who, by means unknown, took control of the four most powerful of those souls, called the Lord Souls. My understanding, though this is pretty interpretive, is that there's a Lord Soul which intrinsically represents each of the forces allowed for by the existence of fire. I understand them to be Grave Lord Nito's Death Soul, the Izalith Witch's Life Soul, Lord Gwyn's Light Soul, and the Furtive Pygmy's Dark Soul. Never again mentioned by name, the Furtive Pygmy. It's never made explicit why the Lords took on the dragons so they could build a new world, but it seems safe to surmise that they were intoxicated by the potential of exercising their newfound power. Power, I think, is one of the central themes of this game. How it shapes the world, how it flows from regime to regime, and the patterns of oppression and violence it inevitably creates. Power is agency, the ability to make decisions for yourself, and see those decisions through. The game's timeline skips directly from this war to seize power from the dragons, straight into the denouement of the Lord's reign. We ourselves begin as someone of very little power, among many others like us, caught between the forces of life, death, light, and dark. So we'll find ourselves in an interesting position to witness how the Lords used their power by exploring the world formed by their decisions, and will slowly amass power of our own. I think the game has some things to say about the power fantasy represented by so much other media, especially in this particular fantasy RPG genre, and that's another of the key themes we'll be tracking as we carry on. When the misfortunate cleric Hamlet closes his eyes during a quiet moment, his thoughts often turn back to a single fragile memory, one of so few left. The repair box is a specialized mortar used to repair weapons and armor by grinding repair powder. Here the game pulls its first mean trick. That prepare to die tagline was always going to be applicable, because we've already died. In a second, we'll even see that the beautiful face I spent so long crafting has shriveled up and turned to beef jerky. We are undead in this game, and it's not a meaningless distinction. We are essentially an untouchable class shunned by the world. As you might expect, this connects directly with the themes of power I just got done introducing, but we'll get back to that. Here's a passage from Campbell to consider. The hero has died as a modern man, but as eternal man, perfected, unspecific, universal man, he has been reborn. Our undead hero doesn't come with a lot of background, besides what we imagine for him, or to put it more diegetically, what memories we imagine he retains. We kick things off in this undead asylum, a place that Campbell would probably term the belly of the whale, a sphere of rebirth, symbolic of a womb. But we also receive a rather clear call to adventure in the form of this knight who drops us the key to our cell. The stages of a monomyth always tend to come in kind of a muddle, with only a vague adherence to the order they're mentioned in the book. That's because the idea of a universal monomyth is silly, and Campbell had to be vague, yes, but we can't harp on him for this. Campbell knew he was speaking generally about their order. As a side note, why couldn't he just drop us the key? Well, if an item in Dark Souls isn't in a chest, it's always on a body, always. I don't know, it's weird. Anyway, the stages of a monomyth may be hazily defined, but they're still very distinct from one another, and they're universal enough that their shape comes clearly into focus when they show up. We know them when we see them. It's important to note that the very first thing we're compelled to do once we leave our cell is attack these defenseless whelps with our broken sword. We'll soon find the world full of bloodthirsty undead, but we may not be so different from them. There's a few possible explanations. One is that maybe our character is drawn to violence for the same reason as any other hollow. A lack of souls arouses in us an insatiable hunger for the souls of others, even the tiny amount possessed by these losers. Another has to do with our identity as a cleric from Thorland. That's established to be a theocratic type of place, where the hunting of undead is something of a holy act, justified by the idea that we're freeing them from their prison-like bodies trapped in a torturous state of undeath. Text. It's text, get it? I can understand it how I want to. Did you see that monster through the window? Who else but the guardian of the first threshold? We'll take him on and properly kick this pilgrimage off next time. For now, thanks for watching. There's a lot of game here, and this one episode ended up being about 3,500 words. So depending on how much stuff I fast forward through, this could be a long journey we're taking together. Happy to have you on board. If you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, criticisms, congratulations, or conundrums, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe I'll address it in a future episode. For now, goodbye.